Protect the flock, we rally in the lion's den. Shield to shield, the storm is thundering. Unleash the roar, let the lions run. Torch the night until the battle's won.
All right, welcome back to the Lion's Den Wednesday edition. Finally back on track. Now, Sunday's episode I'll have to do Saturday because we're going to Texas. We'll be doing the Texas State Convention, and so the CLC will be heading down there in force. And so I cannot wait to meet everybody and see everybody in Texas, but I will do my episode for PET Arbitration on Saturday night, okay? But today, what we're going to do, and I want to keep the Lion's Den episodes relatively short. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be a little bit longer today because I'm going to do some reading. But when PET Arbitration first started, all my episodes are relatively short, to the point, very specific topics, and then you get into the longer episodes once I realized that my union was quite fighting like I wanted them to. And so it kind of took a turn. But as far as the Lion's Den, I do want to keep them relatively short. Now, we've been doing 6-day count stuff, route protection. And last week, you got to hear a teleconference from some individuals. I don't know who they were, but like I said, we found that on social media. A lot of people had asked if I'd heard it, so edited the names and put it up. But you got to see firsthand the disdain that upper management has for the city letter carrier. A lot of people were talking about it all week long. Just the incompetence, the disgusting incompetence, and the complete wretchedness of those individuals that were on that teleconference. You had supervisors that were obviously part of a vital few, it sounded like, that their stations weren't doing exactly as they were told. And you had some guy and some woman, and they were completely incompetent. And you could tell, with the woman, you could tell that she was one of those that if her bosses told her to tell supervisors that carriers got no additional breaks in the heat, that's exactly what she would do. Straight company woman. And you could tell that in the way she was talking. Her disdain for the city letter carrier. When I say we don't hate them enough, you saw it firsthand why I say that. We've been preaching for years now about I've seen the depths that they'll go to hurt my people. That is exhibit A as far as that, because this woman was a wretch. And I don't see how she is able to supervise anyone in any capacity. The complete wretchedness of that lady, and the way she talked about different things when, she said, EEO, who cares? Who cares about an EEO? This isn't someone from upper management saying that to her constituents. Who cares about an EEO? Talking about injured carriers. Just leave them at home. Don't work them at all. I was glad that y'all were able to hear that. These are things that I've known for a long time, but the city letter carrier needs to hear what goes on behind closed doors. And you got a good opportunity. I imagine listening to that lady, whoever she is, she's probably all week threatened everybody in those meetings. I mean, she's one of those. She's probably said, I'm calling the postal inspectors. I'm going to fire everybody in here. She's one of those. I can tell you just listening to her. But, they were two of the more disgusting individuals I've heard. This guy, clueless as far as M-document step 4s, and yet is in a position of power. And so that's what we're dealing with. And so when I say educate, that's what I'm talking about. Educate. An educated workforce is a devastating thing, and I've said that all along. The city letter carrier has to be educated. We have to be advocates. All of us are advocates. Every single one. The city letter carrier is an advocate for each other. When you write statements against management, when you testify against management, you're an advocate for your brothers and sisters in light blue. The shop steward obviously is an advocate for the city letter carrier as our agent. The formal step A is an advocate for the city letter carrier as our agent. The DRT, arbitration advocates, are advocates for the city letter carrier. Everything that we do, we have to be advocates for light blue. That's the only people that matter, is light blue. The only ones that matter are light blue. And we've got to understand that as a union. Now, the CLC will take over next year, and you will see a shift in the way things are done. A more aggressive, militant type union will be produced after that, and we will educate the workroom floor, and we will go on the offensive. But until then, what can we do? What can we do as a city letter carrier craft? We can educate ourselves. And that's what we'll do on this podcast here, is we're going to educate. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read 3 cites. And next week I will do the same. When I started learning, when I started trying to educate myself, we didn't have social media. And so I told you I used to read B-Team Decisions. As boring as that sounds, B-Team Decisions, read them over and over. And thousands of them, just over and over and over again, I would read them. I'd read the M41, M39, the JCAM. I'd read the Advocate. I'd read, arbitration cites. And one of the things that I learned is that arbitration cites was one of the best ways to educate myself. And why is that? Because arbitration cites will have great issue statements. They're going to be in the arbitration. You'll have management's argument, their position. You'll have the union's position, and then you'll have the arbitrator. They will give you their decision. And so I would read them, wins, losses, mitigations, anything like that. I read thousands of cites. When I was a Formal A, I would read arbitration cites constantly. Obviously, when I became an arbitration advocate back in 2012, I read cites religiously, thousands of arbitration cites. Arbitration cites are put in arbitration as persuasive value. I used to put them in. I was one of the very first ones to put them into my formal Step A contentions. And so, I love arbitration cites. And so this week, I'm going to read 3. I'm going to read 3 arbitration cites to you. And what I want you to do is listen to the arguments, because this is going to start from 2009. I've got one in 2015 and one in 2019. All these are dealing with DOIS in some form or fashion. So we're going all the way back to 2009. And you listen to management's arguments back then. And they're the same arguments as they are today. So that helps you when you're designing cases, when you're putting together case files, when you're thinking of management's arguments. Generally, they're going to be the same. You will see the workroom floor, generally the same. You know for a fact now with that the audio, PET, they're using it primarily against us. You heard that in real time when you were listening to that audio. Whoever the guy was talking about PET, talking about expectations based off of PET and DOIS. You heard them talking about performance, and I'm gonna have some cites for you that will help you there as far as performance. And what was I saying when they were talking? I was like, you didn't see anything about street observations 4584s. You didn't see anything about 1838Cs, any kind of efficiency counts, things that we will raise as contentions if management attempts to come after us based off of PET and DOIS. You have auto pivots now. Those things are based off of DOIS. Pivots in general are based off of DOIS. When they're handing you these 3996s that are pre-filled, hopefully we're grieving those things. Those things are all based off of DOIS and PET. You heard them talking about deny every 3996. They are creating a hostile working environment. You heard it on that audio. They are creating a hostile working environment on the workroom floor for the city letter carrier. You heard that. It's not something I've been saying. You heard that from their own mouths. Deny all the 3996s. And so that's what we're up against. This is the fight that we're in. And so we're going to educate ourselves to fight this fight. Like I said long ago, I'm not in this to make friends. I'm in this to make warriors. And that's what we're going to do. Like I said also, when the CLC takes over, we're going to take over the workroom floor. That's a foregone conclusion. James Henry has tasked me with that, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. We're going to attack the workroom floor like never before. And you see why now with that audio. They hate us. They despise us. The way she talks about our injured brothers and sisters. Keep them at home. Don't allow them to work. They have just as much a right to work as I do. But you have idiots in positions of power. And until we go after that full force, it'll continue. But when I say inconvenience them, inconvenience district managers, when we say we're going to put them in case files, we're going to question them and make them come in front of an arbitrator and show the arbitrator their ignorance, that's what we're going to do. We're going to inconvenience upper management. It's never been done before. We're going to do it, okay? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to read 3 cites. It's a lot of reading, and I apologize, but pay attention to the arguments. Management's argument. I've said this all along. I read cites. One of the best ways to educate yourself is to read arbitration cites. I truly believe that. I've read thousands of them during my time. And when you go into arbitration, you can, just based off of reading cites, I can tell you what management's position is going to be. I used to write opening statements. I wrote an opening statement once in Memphis. And after I finished my opening statement, management asked for a recess. And she went out and she told labor that somebody had sent me her opening statement because my opening statement addressed everything she was fixing to say. That's the honest to God's truth. I had Brian Butcher was with me, and he can tell you. But she asked for recess after I did my opening statement. She asked for a continuance because she said there was some tomfoolery going on, that somebody from labor had forwarded me her opening statement because I addressed every single point she was fixing to make. That's nothing more than me reading cites. I know where they're going to go. I know what they're going to say before they even say it. It's because it's a history of it. These are the arguments they always make. And so, cites to me are critical. And so whenever you can get your hands on them, read them. Read them. But I'm going to read 3 to you today. All right, so enough talking. I want these, like I said, to be relatively short. But unfortunately, I've got 3 cites, and so it's going to take a little bit of time. But this is what I'm going to do. We're going to talk about DOIS and PET until I'm tired of talking about DOIS and PET. Why? Because these are the things that are attacking the carrier right now. I think every MBA should be talking about DOIS and PET. Why? It's age old. We've always dealt with it because you heard firsthand upper management telling their constituents, telling their supervisors, set expectations based off of PET, set expectations based off of DOIS. And there are carriers, there are stewards that have no idea what's going on. They have no idea that this is happening, that there is a thing called PET, that there is a thing called DOIS. And so I think that every business agent in any regional training should be dealing with topics that are affecting the city letter carrier right now. Toxic working environment, PET, DOIS, 3996s, unauthorized overtime. This new Article 8 that nobody can understand. I think that these are things that they should be doing. And so, but we've got evidence now that PET, they're driving PET, they're denying 3996s based off of PET and DOIS. They're berating supervisors because of their not holding carriers in check based on their performance. And I've got a site for you that will deal with that. Even though they never requested any 4584s or 1838Cs. And so, what we're going to do here on the Lion's Den is we're going to start talking about PET until I'm tired of talking about it. Because this is what's going to affect my carriers, all right? So the first one I've got is arbitrator Peter Clark. This one is from 2009. And if you remembered me talking about arbitrator August's decision, I read it. She referenced arbitrator Clark. Well, this is the case that she referenced, all right? And so it says issue whether the Postal Service violated the national agreement, including the applicable handbooks and manuals, by using DOIS recordings to set carriers' daily office and street time each morning. Now, this is 2009, okay? Now, Mallory's going to put these up for you, but if you got a pen, write down these C numbers, 28556 A and B. 28556 A and B. And this is arbitrator Peter Clark. And I'm going to read this issue again. Whether the Postal Service violated the national agreement, including the applicable handbooks and manuals, by using DOIS recordings to set carriers' daily office and street time. You heard that in that audio. You heard that. You heard the guy demanding that. Set these expectations based off of PET. You heard this woman that was screaming like a banshee the whole time. You heard her saying that. All right? And 2, whether a hostile working environment is created by the Postal Service use of DOIS to set carriers' daily office and street time. And then he has the relevant contract provisions. Now, he's got down here where he has cited, and it's kind of a subscript down here, 1, and he states the issues stated by the arbitrator differ from the issues identified by the Step B team, but essentially ask the same questions just in a more concise way. The actual issues stated by the Step B team were 1, management using their DOIS recordings stops at each carrier case in the morning and records the imprecise piece count of letters and flats for that route. Management then attempts to set the carrier's daily office and street time by informing the carrier when he or she needs to leave the office and return. Has management violated the national agreement, including but not limited to Article 19, the joint statement, and the methods handbooks M39, section 242.3. And so he changed up the, you don't see that much, but he changed up the issue statement and made that his own. And so you have the relevant contract provisions. You got section 115.2 of the M39 handbook, using people effectively. 115.4 of the M39 handbook, obviously maintain mutual respect atmosphere. Section 122.21 of the M39 handbook, the leaving time for the carrier is determined by the following: A, workload, the normal workload for the route. B, availability of mail, the time all the mail for the same day's delivery is available. C, necessary office time, time required to case this mail, withdraw, tray or strap out mail, obtain parcel post, and complete other required office duties. And that's what PET cuts out. And so that's a good section for us, 122.21 of the M39 handbook when dealing with PET. Section 122.22 of the M39 handbook, maintain leaving schedules. Section 122.23 of the M39 handbook talks about when upon the request the employee will be provided a Form 3996. Section 242.311 of the M39 handbook, and Section 242.2321 of the M39 handbook. And so if you're looking for contractual language to help, that's a good site for you. And it says relevant facts. On February 14, 2009, Supervisor Reese Davis posted a laminated placard at each carrier case. The placard had spaces to write in the number of letter pieces, flat pieces, and the expected leave and return times for the individual carrier. Now, this is happening again. I think Paul Belanger put up the other day that this is a national thing being sent out again, where they're doing this again, putting these placards, these times at the ends of cases. On February 7, 2009, Supervisor Davis was questioned about why the placards were posted at the carrier's cases. Supervisor Davis responded that the placards were only there to comply with the POOM, who may come by the facility and will want to see the placards displayed. Nothing further was discussed with the carriers at the time. On February 24th of 2009, before the carriers began tour, Supervisor Davis began walking around to each carrier's case and recording on the posted placard the piece count of amount of letters and flats taken from the Delivery Operations Information System, or DOIS numbers. The DOIS numbers were generated from the workload status report. The DOIS numbers were also recorded before all the mail was available for the carriers to case for their routes. In addition to recording the DOIS numbers, the supervisor began informing the carriers of their leave and return times based on the DOIS numbers. Does that sound familiar? After receiving the DOIS numbers and their leave and return times, the carriers would then inform the supervisor if they needed any help to complete their route in the allotted 8-hour time period. If additional time was needed, a carrier auxiliary control form 3996 was filled out, and the supervisor would either approve or disapprove the request. On March 10, 2009, a grievance was filed regarding the new manner in which postal management utilized the DOIS numbers and determined the carrier's leave and return times. The grievances went unresolved through the lower grievance levels and were appealed to arbitration to be heard by this duly appointed arbitrator. Discussion and opinion. This is the NELC's position. The union argues that the Postal Service is violating the national agreement by using the DOIS numbers to determine the office and street times, leave and return times for the letter carriers. The union points out that the Postal Service has admitted using the DOIS numbers to determine leave and return times for the carriers. See Joint Exhibit 2. At 10, 3, 4, and 6, the evidence establishes that imprecise piece count of flat and letter mail and DPS machine and flat sorting machine volume were entered into DOIS computer program, which then prints out the workload status report. Joint Exhibit 2 at 64. The DOIS numbers from the WSR is then recorded on placards at the carrier's cases. The information includes letter volume and flat volume and leave and return time for the route that day. The Postal Service tries to hold carriers to DOIS numbers as close as possible. Can y'all hear me fighting off these yawns? I tell you, it's automatic, man, when I start reading. I'm fighting these yawns. If y'all could see me. Oh, the Postal Service's reliance on DOIS numbers is in violation of the nation's class action grievance settlement M1664, and we talk about that one all the time, which specifically states DOIS projections are not the sole determinant of carriers' leaving or return time or daily workload. Moreover, by basing carrier office leave and street and return time solely on DOIS numbers, the Postal Service is attempting to set new street standards and office standards for the carriers in violation of National Pre-Arbitration Settlement M1444, which specifically states in part, furthermore, the pre-arbitration settlement there, dated October 22nd, 1985, provides that there is no set pace at which a carrier must walk and no street standard for walking. And that's the one, remember the guy last week had never heard of it. Matter of fact, whoever the lady was, she'd never heard of it. They didn't even know it existed. One of the most basic things that we know, that there is no street standard. There's no set pace at which a carrier must walk. They had no idea. And that's the reason we're having so many issues on the workroom floor, because upper management doesn't know anything. Complete incompetence on them. All they are is yes men. If their bosses tell them to come down and say, hey, tell the carriers that there's no extra breaks in the heat. That's exactly what this woman's going to say. I wish somebody would have said that in that recording. I wish somebody would have said, well, the carrier told us that, they're taking breaks as needed in the heat. I would love to have heard her response to that. I would have loved to have heard it. You know what I'm saying? You're talking about a wretched woman sitting there talking about EEO. Who cares? Injured workers, leave them at home. They don't need to be working. The pre-arbitration settlement also held, it is additionally understood that the current city letter carrier route adjustment process is outlined in subchapter 141 and chapter 2 of the M39 handbook. All those functionalities in DOIS which relate to the route inspection adjustment process must be in compliance with these two parts of the M39 as long as they are in effect. The only agreed upon method for changing office or street standards is outlined in the M39 handbook. The Postal Service's insistence on trying to hold carriers to the DOIS projected office leave and street return times violates the criteria set forth in the M39 handbook. See Joint Exhibit 2 at 26. M39 Handbook 242.311 states that, under normal conditions, the office time allowance for each letter route shall be fixed at the lesser of the carrier's average time used to perform the office work during the count period, or the average standard allowable office time. In addition, M39 Handbook 242.321 provides, for evaluation and adjustment purposes, the base for determining the street time shall be either A, the average street time for the 7 weeks random time card analysis, and the week following the week of count and inspection, or B, the average street time used during the week of count and inspection. The Postal Service failed to follow those provisions, and that has led to a hostile working environment for carriers. See why I love reading Cites? Great language in there to help new stewards. Where do I go? What do I even begin with when we're dealing with PET and DOIS? These are why these sites are so critical. Good language, obviously a good case file put together, and good arguments made at arbitration. In particular, carriers have complained about how stressful the environment is since Supervisor Davis has utilized the DOIS numbers to determine the leave and return times. The carriers felt badgered, bullied, and harassed. PM Hansen has also threatened the carriers with possible termination if they don't meet the DOIS numbers. Now, you heard that, not to that extent, but in that recording, when that guy continued with his insistence on set expectations. How many times did he say that? Set expectations based off of PET and DOIS. Go after their performance. You heard that woman. Go after their performance. Who do you work for? The post office or the union? Crazy stuff. But you heard that. Set expectations based off of PET and DOIS. Go after their performance, even though they did nothing to gauge the performance. Not a single thing. And I got a great site for you on that. In all the improper use of DOIS as the sole factor for determining carriers' leave and return time, and the manner in which postal management interacts with the carriers regarding their DOIS numbers, violates the national agreement. The Postal Service should be required to cease and desist from using DOIS and from creating a hostile working environment for the carriers. Now, here's the service's position. This is what the Postal Service came with. And see if this sounds familiar. The Postal Service argues that it is difficult to determine exactly what the union is challenging. The initial problem in this grievance is the position taken by the union, utilization of DOIS to set carriers' leaving and return times, doesn't match the remedy requested or the relevant citation contained in the defined issue. The union provides no evidence that routes were adjusted due to any projected leaving or return times. As such, unless the union wished to change its issue at this late state, it would be impossible for the arbitrator to find a violation as defined by the issue. Moreover, there appears to have been no change in the evaluation of any route based on the evidence contained in this appeal. Notwithstanding the above, the evidence in this record reflects no violation of the terms of the national agreement. Evidence establishes the Postal Service has utilized the DOIS numbers to initiate discussion, and they will always say that. We're only having a discussion. We have the right to have a discussion based off of PET, based off of DOIS. We have a right to use these things as tools to have a discussion. That's how they will try to sell that to an arbitrator. That's the reason it's critical that we have carrier statements. It's more than just a discussion. You heard that audio. It's more than just a discussion. They're challenging us. They're denying 3996s based off of PET. You heard that. Challenge them on their projections. Challenge them on their performance. You heard those things. But this is what they'll always say. They'll always put it back on the carrier. However, evidence also establishes that DOIS number is not the sole factor when determining carriers' leaving and return times, and carriers are not held to the projected leaving and return times. Reviewing the records reflect that several carriers, 12 out of 20, complete their routes in less time than the DOIS projections. Others complete their routes in more time than the DOIS projections, 7 out of 20. Only one carrier in the record met the DOIS projected times, which accounts for only 5% of all the carriers. Nevertheless, no evidence exists that any carrier was ever disciplined for failing to adhere to the DOIS projected times, and that will be an argument that most of them will make. We haven't disciplined anybody. Nobody's been disciplined. They can create a hostile working environment for us as long as we're not disciplined. We can berate them, belittle them, harass them, intimidate them. We can do all these things as long as we don't discipline them. And that's their position. You'll see that position a lot. Nobody's been disciplined. Well, you've created a hostile work environment. You're beating us to death in there based off of projections, off of PET and DOIS. And so just be careful and make sure you're aware that that argument will come forward. All right? Nobody's ever been disciplined. They'll say that. Our position is it doesn't matter. You've created a hostile work environment by the way you're implementing PET and DOIS. The audio again. I'm going to keep harping on it. The audio again. You heard them. Projections. Set expectations. Deny 3996s. All those things create a hostile working environment. The Postal Service acknowledged that the use of DOIS numbers as the sole basis to set or establish carrier's leaving or return time is improper. However, no evidence suggests that the Postal Service has set or established carrier's leaving or return times because only one carrier has met the DOIS projections. Furthermore, the grievance settlement relied upon by the union acknowledges that DOIS may be utilized to estimate a carrier's daily workload. Evidence also established that the use of DOIS was nothing more than a beginning point to begin discussion with the carriers. Such discussion is a proper exercise of managerial authority and found in the M39 Handbook section 115.2 and 122.21. Regarding the union's claim of the existence of a hostile working environment, it appears that his claim is based more on perception than factual evidence. What is clear is that a few of the carriers assigned to Shawnee Post Office disapproved of Supervisor Davis's managerial style, and that's 100% of what you'll hear on every single one of them. They just don't like being supervised. No carrier likes being supervised. They don't like being told what to do. That's going to be their argument. That's cookie cutter argument for anything when we talk about hostile work environment, joint statement. It's the carrier's fault. They just don't like being supervised. I'll read that again. Regarding the union's claim of the existence of a hostile working environment, it appears that his claim is based more on perception than factual evidence. What is clear is that a few of the carriers assigned to Shawnee Post Office disapproved of Supervisor Davis's management style. It must be assumed that if Supervisor Davis was truly harassing the carriers or a bully, as suggested, he would have continued this path with an ultimate desire to issue disciplinary action. However, fatally missing to support these assertions of harassment and bullying is a single piece of disciplinary action issued to any carrier at the Shawnee Post Office. Indeed, throughout the record, Supervisor Davis issued not a single disciplinary action based on the issue of carrier leaving and return times. That's because they know it would be almost impossible to win. So what they relegate themselves to is bullying, harassing, intimidation. They know discipline's going to go nowhere based off of DOIS projections. They know that. They know that discipline's going to go nowhere based off of PET projections, trying to hold us to those things. They know that. So you're not going to see much discipline, but you'll see a lot of harassment, a lot of bullying, a lot of loud talking, a lot of degrading. You'll see that. Supervisor Davis is a large man with a loud voice. This is apparently his nature and hardly rises to the level of substantiate any claims of harassment, bullying, or badgering. Supervisor Davis is a former city letter carrier who has sufficient experience to engage in discussions with carriers regarding necessary time to case and carry the routes. Even assuming some of these discussions became somewhat heated between Supervisor Davis and the carriers at issue, that alone does not equate to bullying, harassment, or badgering. As stated by Arbitrator Eisenminger in an award involving similar claims by the union, she states, the union witnesses claimed that during these conversations Mr. Jones became angry, to which Mr. Jones denied he ever became angry. I do not doubt that on some occasions the conversations digressed to some extent, but there is insufficient evidence that Mr. Jones negligently or intentionally engaged in conduct that was disrespectful, lacked dignity to others, or was manifestly unfair. It may well be that Mr. Jones lacks the experience and demeanor to interface with more experienced carriers, and that undoubtedly he could have benefited by the use of more tact and diplomacy. On the other hand, there were no specific descriptions of abusive, offensive, or rude behavior or comments from Mr. Jones on any particular occasion. The sole specific comment attributed to Mr. Jones by one carrier was that Mr. Jones questioned the carrier's Form 3996 and said that other carriers could carry that route in 8 hours, then why couldn't he? Referring to the carrier. While it is understandable that the carrier felt offended by this comment, it is equally possible that under the circumstances, Mr. Jones was merely making an observation. His lack of tact, however, does not equate to a violation of the 3 authorities cited in this grievance. It says, see that case number there. The similarities in the present appeal are clear. Claims of Supervisor Davis's alleged bullying and harassment rest with relatively few carriers, and of those, Mr. Davis claimed he continued to maintain personal relationships with some outside of work. There simply is insufficient evidence to find hostile working environment. Analysis. The union contests the Postal Service use of DOIS numbers to determine carriers' leave and return times. In addition, as a result of the use of DOIS numbers, the Postal Service has created a hostile working environment. These complained about are allegedly in violation of the M39 Handbook. For the reasons stated below, the grievances are sustained. The grievances were nothing more than a tale of two different stories, or put differently, the same story told two different ways. Either way, the union's account of what transpired beginning on February 24, 2009, paints a picture of harassment, intimidation, and otherwise rough-handedness by the Shawnee Postal Management, most notably PM Hanson and Supervisor Davis. The Postal Service's account, on the other hand, merely reflects that it is utilizing DOIS and other factors to efficiently run its operations at Shawnee. The testimony that was presented at this arbitration hearing reflected the divergent positions, but gave the arbitrator a clear understanding of which version of the story was more plausible. Shane Whitehead testified that he is currently a T6 letter carrier and has worked for the Postal Service for 14 years. He is also the branch president for the Shawnee Local Union. Prior to the change to the DOIS numbers on February 24, 2009, carriers would case their mail, and then Supervisor Davis would walk around and ask carriers how they were looking today, a reference to whether they felt they would need a 3996 to request auxiliary help to complete their routes. The typical responses would be, "We're okay," or "We may need X amount of time." Once the placards were placed at the carrier's cases, he asked Supervisor Davis about their significance, and he was told not to worry about them. He believed Supervisor Davis and did not pursue the matter any further at that time. About a week later, Supervisor Davis began instructing carriers that they had to abide by the numbers he recorded on the placard. Mr. Whitehead asked Supervisor Davis where he got the numbers he used to record on the placard, and he responded, "DOIS," and that's what we always say. Anytime you have a 3996 denied and they say volume doesn't justify this time, you'll see that all the time. They'll deny it. Volume doesn't justify the time. Always ask them where they're getting their numbers at. Always ask them that. They're going to say DOIS or PET. They may try to make up some stuff. Well, just everything that we use DOIS and PET and other things, and your volume just doesn't show it. Your 3996, demonstrated performance, all these things. And so make sure we're asking, okay, just like they did. He said, Mr. Whitehead asked Supervisor Davis where he got the numbers he used to record on the placard, and he responded, DOIS. When carriers would ask him for a 3996, Supervisor Davis would argue or get combative with them and respond like, "You don't really need that time," or "I can't justify that time. My numbers don't match." One of the biggest problems with the Postal Service use of DOIS was that at the time Supervisor Davis came around and gave the leave and return time, some of the mail had not yet arrived at the station. There were additional parcels, letters, and other types of mail that would arrive on a later truck that were not taken into account when the leave and return times were given. Mr. Whitehead then explained how the DOIS numbers were derived. Each morning, a supervisor would take a ruler and measure the amount of residual flats and letters sent into the office and convert that measurement into a piece count, which is then inputted in the DOIS system. And that's the reason DOIS is so inexact, and that's the reason we don't consider it. It's because it's based off a linear measurement. It's not based off a piece count. And linear measurement is always wrong. Y'all know what I'm talking about, those of you who deliver mail. You can have a bucket, it can be full, and it can have 40 pieces. Thick things in there. You could have another, have 1,000 pieces. You know what I'm talking about. And so that's the reason DOIS, we don't take that into account. It's inexact. It's linear measurement. And we don't go by linear measurement. Go by piece count. All right. DOIS then generates the number of letters and flats a carrier has and determines the time a carrier will need that day to deliver the mail. He explained that DOIS is not inaccurate and that based on DOIS, carriers have been denied their 3996 request for auxiliary help. He stated the M39 handbook sets forth a procedure for determining carriers' leave and return times. He also discussed several arbitration awards contained in the record, which reiterated that the M39 handbook governed the leave and return times for a carrier. Mr. Whitehead added that supervisors have intimidated carriers by driving their routes several times a day. He also discussed a grievance that was filed because the Shawnee postmaster, Andre Hanson, had a stand-up talk with the carriers wherein she threatened them with termination if they did not meet the DOIS numbers. And that sounds like something this person on this telecom would have said. Threatened them with termination if they did not meet the DOIS numbers. She would become a hard ass towards them. He admitted that no carrier has been disciplined for failing to meet the DOIS numbers. There have been, however, several discussions with carriers who failed to meet DOIS numbers, which leads to the carriers feeling bullied and intimidated. Rodney Youngwolf, a carrier, testified that Postal Service management was only using the DOIS numbers to set his leave and return times rather than asking him how long he thought it would take to deliver the mail. He stated he knew that they were using the DOIS numbers because he has been showed a workload status report which contains the DOIS numbers. He supported Mr. Whitehead's testimony by saying that at the time the supervisor gives the leave and return times, there is still additional mail yet to be delivered that affects the delivery time. He feels like postal management does not trust him, and he feels angry by the use of the DOIS numbers and the way Supervisor Davis instructed him about his leave and return times. He stated he has been threatened with discipline and referred to the stand-up talk by PM Hansen where she stated she would be a hard ass. He also was threatened with discipline by his supervisor and recalled an incident where the supervisor told him he could clock out and go home if he did not agree with the DOIS numbers. He also talked about feeling harassed when supervisors would visit his route as if to check up on him. He stated that prior to the placard system and the use of DOIS numbers, his supervisors would walk around and give him his DPS mail count and then ask him about how much time he thought he would need to deliver the mail. Virgil Newport, Jr., a letter carrier, testified that he has been employed at the Postal Service for over 27 years. He is also a union steward and actually filed the grievance. He stated that the DOIS numbers were used to determine his leave and return times and how he felt that postal management harassed and bullied carriers to meet the DOIS numbers. He was harassed about meeting the DOIS numbers and had his 3996 request denied for not meeting the DOIS numbers. He stated he had numerous visits to his route by supervisors after the use of the DOIS numbers began. He also recalled the incident with PM Hansen during the stand-up talk. The arbitrator asked him whether the visits to his route increased substantially since February 2009, and he said yes. Sandy Reese Davis, Supervisor Davis, testified that he is currently the temporary OIC in Luther, Oklahoma. He is normally a supervisor at the Shawnee PO and has been for 6 years. He stated that DOIS is a tool used to help management and determine times for routes. The DOIS numbers are derived from the mail volume that management counts and the mail that comes in from the DPS machines and flat sorting machines in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. He then described how he would, on a daily basis, instruct the carriers about their leave and return times based upon the DOIS numbers. He starts with City 1 route and tells the carriers how many letters, flats, and DPS amount there is for the day. Then, based on the carrier's percent to standard, how fast the carrier cases mail, and whether it's full coverage, mail that gets delivered to everyone on the route, e.g. circulars, he provides the carrier's leave and return times. If his numbers differ from the carrier's, he stated he asked the carrier why the carrier needs more time. He stated that he asked the carrier the reason because there are only 5 acceptable reasons for requesting auxiliary help, though he did not provide those reasons. In addition, if, for example, the carrier stated he had a lot of parcels, he would go to the route data book that records what the carrier's base figure is for parcels, and if the actual figure is over the base figure, then the carrier's time is adjusted to account for the overage. Y'all heard that a lot on that teleconference as well. They always talked about parcels under base. In other cases, a carrier may say that there has been a deviation from the route for some reason, construction on the route or what have you, or some other reasons, and then he determines if the request for additional time is justified. If he feels it is not justified, he will try to come to a common ground with the carrier. As a supervisor, it is his job to set expectations and find out why a carrier needs additional time. If a carrier convinces him that additional time is needed, then he approves it, but if not, he doesn't. In those instances where he doesn't approve the request, he would instruct the carrier to take the mail and see what he can do. And most of the times it works out, but sometimes it doesn't. He said he doesn't necessarily hold the carriers to the DOIS projected leave time, although he tries as much as he can. There are other variables that may prevent the carrier from leaving on time. He was asked whether the DOIS numbers were the only thing he used to set leave and return time, and he responded no. Among the factors he also considers are whether there's full coverage, parcels, accountable mail, and growth factors, routes that have grown. He also stated he does get input from the carriers when setting the leave and return times. Supervisor Davis was also asked about whether he always talked in a loud voice as he had been while testifying at the hearing, and he responded, yes. He stated that he doesn't belittle or harass any carriers. He did admit that he did drive by carriers' routes, but that a lot of times he is on his way to lunch, and it's difficult not to drive by a carrier's route while driving around town. He also stated he is required to do street observations of carriers, and so sometimes he goes out to observe a carrier for various things, including seeing if the carrier is on time and checking for safety violations. Supervisor Davis said he has never issued discipline for any carrier who dismissed the DOIS projected leave or return times. He then read through some of the carrier's statements contained in the record and was asked to comment on them. He stated he was disappointed in what they said, especially because he has socialized with several of them off duty. He talked about going fishing and to dinner with some carriers and trading CDs with some. In his opinion, if he were them and had harassed and belittled carriers as they alleged, he would not socialize with him as they had off duty. On cross-examination, he admitted that he did not always have all the mail accounted for that the carriers would case on any particular morning. He also admitted that parcels do affect the carrier's leave time and that parcels are not counted when he writes down the numbers on the placard, which records only letters and flats. The arbitrator, whether DOIS was primarily used to set leave and return times. In the arbitrator's opinion, the sum of the testimony provided at the hearing indicated that beginning on February 24, 2009, a shift occurred in the philosophy regarding how leave and return times are determined. What was once to the carriers a process whereby their experience and expertise were relied upon with management tools such as DPS mail counts became more of a rigid do as DOIS suggests directive. What was never explained, strangely enough, was why a change was needed at all. Absolutely no evidence was introduced about what prompted the change of the process beginning on February 24, 2009. Perhaps some time of comparison of carriers' leave and return times before February 2009 and after would have shed light on the need for the change. Instead, what was presented at the arbitration hearing was more argument about why the Postal Service could use DOIS numbers, among other factors, to determine carriers' leave and return times. The arbitrator was simply left to speculate why the Postal Service believed the obvious reliance on the DOIS numbers after February 24, 2009 was justified. That said, the testimony by Supervisor Davis suggested that contrary to the M39 handbook and various grievance settlements contained in the record, the DOIS numbers are the primary, in some cases only, method of determining carriers' leave and return times in Shawnee. As much as he later tried to incorporate other factors into consideration, Supervisor Davis made it abundantly clear that the DOIS numbers were first and foremost the determining factor for carriers' leave and return times, and y'all heard that in real time in that audio. What did that man say? Set expectations on PET. Get into your PET. Get into your DOIS. Set expectations. He's telling you that. Rather than it being one of many factors, utilization of the DOIS numbers is the starting point and, unless proved otherwise, ending point. Supervisor Davis' account of his daily routine started with a workload status report, which compiled the DOIS numbers into the carrier's projected office and street times, leave and return times. From that point, it was an uphill battle for a carrier to convince Supervisor Davis why the DOIS numbers were not accurate or why a 3996 was needed. That's beautiful, and it's 100% what's going on with us today. From that point, it was an uphill battle for a carrier to convince Supervisor Davis why the DOIS numbers were not accurate or why a 3996 was needed. When you come in and they're doing PET, you're automatically behind the 8 ball, and I've said that. You're automatically behind the 8 ball because it takes all of your office work out. Only thing you get credit for is sticking your mail. You heard that lady say that. With the mail that he has, his office time was only 20 minutes. That is PET. That's PET. It took away all of our fixed office time. All of it. She said it. Looking at his volume, his office time should have been 20 minutes. That's PET. I'll read this again. From that point, it was an uphill battle for a carrier to convince Supervisor Davis why the DOIS numbers were not accurate or why a 3996 was needed. This is 2009. Here's 2025. We're still dealing with this same stuff. The testimony of carriers Whitehead, Young Wolf, and Newport revealed that the carrier is, for the most part, now left out of determining the carrier's own leave and return times. The new procedure employed at Shawnee does not mirror the M39 Handbook, Section 122.21 and 242.321, which sets out the manner in which leave and return times are established. Though provisions provide the following: Section 122.21, the leaving time for the carrier is determined by the following: A, workload, the normal workload for the route. B, availability of mail, the time all the mail for the same day's delivery is available. C, most importantly, necessary office time, time required to case the mail, withdrawal, tray or strap out mail, obtain parcel post, and complete other required office duties. And D, business hours, normal community business hours. Section 242.321, for evaluation and adjustment purposes, the base for determining the street time shall be either A, the average street time for the 7 weeks random time card analysis and the week following the week of count and inspection, or B, the average street time used during the week of count and inspection. Although Section 122.21 does reference the utilization of workload data, it is only one of several factors for determining leave time. Therefore, the Postal Service violated the M39 handbooks and related settlement agreements by primarily using DOIS numbers to set carriers' leave and return time. The arbitrator, whether the Postal Service created a hostile working environment. The union argues that Postal Service created a hostile work environment by using the DOIS numbers to set the carriers' leaving and return times. 11 carriers out of 20 submitted written statements to express their feelings of harassment caused by the use of DOIS and the manner in which the Supervisor Davis instructed them on their leave and return times. When I talked earlier about being an advocate, we're all advocates. All of us in light blue are advocates in some way, some form of fashion. Always be an advocate for your brothers and sisters. Here's advocates. 11 carriers out of 20. You had 11 advocates. Write statements. They're advocating on their brother's behalf, on their sister's behalf. And so that's great to see. When you go in there and you testify on behalf of your brothers and sisters, you're an advocate. The statements express feelings that indicated Supervisor Davis badgered, argued with, and threatened carriers. A stand-up talk by P.M. Hansen wherein she threatened carriers with termination was also mentioned, but that situation was already the subject of a grievance and thus is not in consideration. Section 115.4 of the M39 Handbook states, it is the frontline manager who controls management's attempt to maintain an atmosphere between employers and employee which assures mutual respect for each other's rights and responsibilities. According to the union, the testimony of the 3 carriers and the statement in the record reveal that a hostile environment was created by postal management beginning on February 24th of 2009. The Postal Service disagrees and cites to a grievance decided by arbitrator Eisenmenger involving similar claims by the union. In that grievance, the union claimed that a supervisor was verbally abusive towards letter carriers. Part of the complaints made by the carriers was that the supervisor berated them and talked to them as if they were lying when they requested a $39.96. In all, 9 of the approximate 27 carriers made complaints about the supervisor, 6 through live testimony, and 3 with written statements. Arbitrator Eisenmenger did not find that the supervisor's behavior was disrespectful, lacked dignity to others, or was manifestly unfair. She added that, as a carrier supervisor, he had a responsibility to ensure the Form 3996 request rested on a sound basis. Therefore, it was not untoward for him to question carrier's basis for his or her estimate. The arbitrator believes the facts of this grievance are distinguishable from the cited grievance. First, the evidence adduced did paint Supervisor Davis in a negative light and could be considered hostile to some. The complaints made by the carriers who testified and the carriers who submitted written statements center around the conflict between the DOIS numbers and the previous manner in which their leave and return times were determined. In addition, the carriers also complained about how their 3996 requests were handled, perceived heightened supervision, and feeling a lack of trust. All of the complaints resulted from or were subsequent to the use of the DOIS numbers as the primary method for determining leave and return times. In the arbitrator's opinion, part of the problem is that the carriers have resisted the change and prefer the old method. The other part is the manner in which Supervisor Davis and others have attempted to implement the new process. There is no doubt that people are creatures of habit, and that when a profound change occurs, it is often met with resistance and animosity. In the instant grievance, had the arbitrator found that the Postal Service's use of DOIS numbers did not violate the national agreement, most likely Supervisor Davis's behavior would be construed as much like the supervisor's behavior was in the cited grievance decided by arbitrator Eisenmenger. However, by concluding that the Postal Service did violate the national agreement, the improper use of DOIS numbers led to the resistance and animosity and ultimately created a hostile working environment for the carriers. In essence, but for the Postal Service's improper utilization of the DOIS numbers, a hostile working environment would not have been created. His award: for the foregoing reasons, the grievances are sustained. The Postal Service is to cease and desist from primarily using the DOIS numbers to set carriers' leave and return times. Going forward, the Postal Service shall follow the provisions of the M39 handbook to determine the leave and return times. In addition, the Postal Service must cease and desist from creating a hostile working environment by not following the M39 handbook to determine leave and return times. And so there's a fantastic case. I love that Cite arbitrator August cited him in her decision. It's a beautiful decision for us, and it's a great one to learn from. I hate reading, obviously, and I'm blind as hell, and so I'm trying to read this on my laptop past my mic, and so that's the reason I read like that, because I got my glasses on, but I can't see anything. And so here's another from 2015, and it's from arbitrator Toby Braverman. In the awards, the grievances sustained, the employer shall cease and desist from utilizing DOIS projections as the sole determinant of letter carriers' leaving times, and shall cease and desist in its practice of announcing all mail is up prior to complete distribution of the mail. Award summary. The evidence demonstrated that the employer used DOIS projections as the sole determinant of a carrier's leave times in violation of various Step 4 settlements. This, with the practice of announcing all mail is up prior to the distribution of all mail, contributed to making the office environment unduly stressful, and both practices should therefore cease. It says facts. The instant case arose, this one is C31897. Sorry about that. 31897. C31897. Facts. The instant case arose as a result of a series of pre-disciplinary interviews and letters of warnings issued to letter carriers at the Germantown, Maryland main post office in February, March, and early April of 2014. All the incidents concern the letter carrier's failure to leave the office by the time instructed by management on particular dates during those months. Among the letter carriers, some were not issued any discipline after the PDI, while others were issued letters of warnings. None was issued discipline beyond a letter of warning. Those letters of warnings were the subject of separate grievances, and although all the letters of warnings were ultimately rescinded, the instant grievance was filed as a class action grieving the practice of instructing letter carriers to leave the office at a specific time and threatening or imposing discipline if they did not leave at the time specified. The testimony of the letter carriers who testified at hearing was that shortly after they arrive at work each morning, the supervisor circulates to each carrier and, reading from a document on a clipboard, advises the carrier of his leaving time that day. The times stated are to the minute, and the letter carriers either observed or presumed that the document from which the supervisor is reading is the day's DOIS projections for the route. They further testified that although they were being told to leave and the mail was being called as all up by management, in fact, the mail is not ready at that time. The carriers testified that they are frequently required to wait on mail or parcels after supervision has announced that all mail has been distributed. As a result, they simply cannot leave by the time directed by management. According to the branch vice president and chief steward, Charles Clark, during the PDIs, he observed that the supervisor was asking why the carriers had not left at a specific leaving time based upon a DOIS report. Based upon that, he believes that the leaving times concerned which the carriers were being questioned were based solely upon DOIS projections. According to the PDI notes, while the carriers were asked why they failed to leave at the appointed time, there are no questions concerning any alleged misconduct or time-wasting practices. The letter carriers further testified that the imposition of the requirement that they leave at the times which were not achievable resulted in undue stress. Some testified that they felt pressured to skip breaks and lunch, and the threat of discipline was intimidating and stressful. Postmaster Hugo Aldana testified that expectations are given to each carrier each day, and this includes the leave times as well as other daily expectations. According to Aldana, however, those leave times are routinely based on several factors, not just DOIS projections as alleged. The factors include mail volumes, which are found in DOIS, the arrival time of the mail, the type of mail, and the time when the mail is ready. The instructions regarding leaving times are not based strictly on DOIS mail volumes as alleged. Aldana explained that the mail is called up on the intercom at the appointed up time each day, and after this announcement is made, all carriers are expected to pull down and leave the office as soon as possible. According to Aldana, all mail should be distributed by the uptime, but that is not necessarily the case. The instant grievance was filed alleging a violation of the national agreement and Step 4 settlements regarding the use of DOIS. The grievance also alleges that the stress engendered by the PDIs and letters of warning regarding not leaving at the appointed time is a violation of the joint statement on violence. The grievance proceeded through the grievance procedure without resolution to arbitration. Position of the parties. Union position. The union contends that it has met its burden of proof to demonstrate that the employer has violated the provisions of the national agreement and binding Step 4 settlements regarding the use of DOIS. The evidence is demonstrated through the testimony of all the letter carriers who testified at hearing, demonstrated that the employer has routinely advised them of a very precise leaving time based upon a document from which the supervisor was reading approximately 10 minutes after clocking in for the day. The time was given after uptime had been called, but before all mail was distributed. As a result, the carriers could not possibly be ready to leave for the street as instructed. Despite this fact, the carriers were called in for PDIs and some were given letters of warning. The parties at the national level have agreed that DOIS cannot be used for discipline without additional evidence of carrier time wasting or other misconduct. According to the testimony of Vice President Clark, the supervisor was reading times from the DOIS document when he questioned carriers in the PDIs. There was nothing more provided. There is no doubt that the sole basis for the leaving times and the threatened discipline was DOIS. This is a clear violation and additionally creates an atmosphere of stress and intimidation. While there have not been any additional disciplinary actions, the employer is still giving carriers leaving times based solely on DOIS. The union therefore requests an order for that the employer cease and desist from this practice. Employer position. The employer argues that the union has failed to meet its burden of proof to demonstrate a violation of the national agreement. Although the union makes a very specific allegation concerning the use of DOIS, it never requested any supporting DOIS documents, and they are not before the arbitrator. The union has simply not met the threshold burden of proof to demonstrate that in fact the employer relied exclusively on DOIS in assigning letter carrier leaving times. The testimony of Postmaster Aldana was that the leaving times were determined based upon DOIS as well as several other factors, including arrival of mail, distribution of mail, weather conditions, and other factors which may be relevant on any particular day. Clearly, each day is different, and the determining factors will therefore vary day to day. Ultimately, the employer has the right to manage the workforce, and clearly, instructing carriers as to the leaving and return times is an entirely appropriate exercise of management's rights. Finally, while the carriers may have been upset or stressed by being called in for a PDI, the conduct of a PDI simply does not rise to the level of intimidation and a violation of the joint statement. The grievance should be denied. And they've got the relevant contract provisions, Article 3, Article 34, Working Time Standards, M 39, Handbook 122.21, Establishing Leave Schedule, M 1769, which we've talked about numerous times, the Joint Statement on Violent Behavior in the Workplace. And so here's the discussion and findings. As in any arbitration alleging a non-disciplinary contractual violation, the burden of proof is on the union to demonstrate a breach of the relevant contractual language. In this case, the union has the burden of proving that the employer improperly relied upon DOIS projections alone to instruct carriers regarding daily leave times, and that this instruction, taken together with the threats of discipline and disciplinary action, taken as a result of the letter carrier's failure to meet the leaving times, created such a hostile working environment or treated carriers with such a lack of respect and dignity so as to constitute a violation of the Joint Statement on Violence. The union must meet this burden of proof by a preponderance of the evidence. That is, it must demonstrate that it is more likely than not that the violations occurred as alleged. The evidence supporting the allegations that DOIS alone was used in the office to give each carrier leaving time shortly after clocking in for the day was substantial. 7 letter carriers testified independently that they were routinely given leave times that were precise to the minute by supervisors who were reading from a report on a clipboard each morning. While most either were somewhat unclear as to what a DOIS report looked like or what the document being used was, Charles Clark, who attended the PDIs with carriers who were charged with failure to follow instructions, testified that he is familiar with DOIS reports. He directly observed the supervisor conducting the PDI reading from the DOIS reports when asking about the failure to meet specific leaving times drawn from the report. This testimony was not refuted, and the supervisor who conducted the PDIs was not called as a witness. The employer points out that the union could have, but did not, request DOIS reports for the relevant dates. While this would have made the evidence more concrete, in view of the unrebutted testimony, the absence of the documents is not fatal. While Postmaster Aldana testified that leaving times are based upon a number of factors and that DOIS is only one tool among them, there was no evidence to support that these other factors were used in the giving the leaving times. When balanced against Clark's testimony that he saw the DOIS reports being used during the PDIs as the sole basis for precise to-the-minute leaving times, the preponderance of the evidence is that this is in fact what has occurred. The other salient evidence which supports the union's case here is the testimony that supervision routinely announces that all mail is up and carriers should begin to pull down and load before all mail is actually available. Again, all the carriers who testified complained that this occurs regularly. Carriers are told to leave at a specific time, but they must wait for either mail or parcels, making it impossible to leave. Postmaster Aldana denied that this occurs, but his testimony made it apparent that he considers all mail to be up at the time appointed as the up time for the station. He acknowledged, however, that this time is rarely met, but was unclear when asked if the mail is declared to be up before it is all distributed to the carriers. Based upon the preponderance of the testimony at hearing, it appears that what is regularly occurring is that supervision is utilizing DOIS projections to assign each carrier precise leaving time, and this, combined with announcing that all mail is up before it is actually completely distributed, is placing carriers in a situation that makes it impossible to leave at the designated time. The evidence also establishes, however, that while there were a series of PDIs and letter of warnings issued around the time of the filing of this grievance, there have been no further disciplinary actions or PDIs on this issue. Additionally, all the letters were grieved and removed. While the practice of threatening discipline for failure to leave on a time appears to have stopped, the issue of the stressful environment created remains. There is no question that by routinely giving letter carriers instructions they cannot possibly be met, the employer is unduly increasing the stress level in the office. That's exactly what is happening with PET. When you heard that teleconference, that is exactly what's happening. You are giving us expectations that we cannot meet. You're berating supervisors for not holding us to expectations that we cannot meet. They know that we can't meet them. Their upper bosses know that they can't meet them. And they're still beating us to death over it. And that's where we're at. That's what creates the hostile working environment. You're setting expectations based off of PET. We cannot meet them. It's impossible for us to meet them. That's what she said here. There is no question that routinely giving letter carriers instructions that cannot possibly be met, the employer has unduly increased the stress level in the office. This appears to be done in order to appear to meet assigned up times, even though doing so is an impossibility based upon mail arrival and distribution times. This in turn increases stress and pressure on the carriers, and as several testified, makes them feel pressure to forego breaks and lunch on the street in order to make it up. While it is subject to argument as to whether this rises to the level of abuse to make the numbers, it clearly does increase the stress in the office, in violation of at least the spirit of the Joint Statement on Violence. Clearly, the employer has the right to determine the time at which carriers should leave the office and to instruct them accordingly. Just as clearly, however, the parties have agreed that DOIS projections may not be the sole basis for the determination. It is similarly inappropriate to announce that all mail is distributed before the task is actually complete and all mail and parcels are actually distributed to the carriers. These two practices, which when taken together result in the creation of an unduly stressful environment, and should cease. The grievance is sustained. The employer shall cease and desist from utilizing DOIS projections as the sole determinant of letter carrier leave time, and shall cease and desist in his practice of announcing all mail is up prior to the complete distribution of the mail. And that's C31897. So there's two great cites for you dealing with DOIS projections. Two fantastic cites. And we're going to keep doing that. I know that's boring. I'm bored. I fell asleep twice already and I had to edit that out. But I'm bored reading it. But this has been me since 2008. This has been my life. Reading arbitration cites. And that's how I read them. I read them front to back. And I'll read them again and again and again. Getting those arguments, getting those contractual provisions, getting those issue statements. And that's just how I've done it. That's how I've learned. And so I'm just going to keep doing it. I apologize. Here's the last one. I'm already on an hour and 15 minutes. Goodness gracious alive. This is a fantastic one for when you're listening to that teleconference and they're talking about performance. Go after the carriers for performance. And what was I saying? They never requested the first 4584. They never requested any 1838Cs. Right? You're not going to get a manager to get off their behind and go out on the route. They're just not going to do it. They're too busy in these teleconferences. But they will talk to them, go after the carrier for their performance. What are you doing about their performance? Send me the 3999. Send me the 1017B logs. Send me the 3996s. Right? They not once did they say, send me the 4584s where you've gone out on the street. Send me those things. Send me the 1838Cs where you've done an efficiency count. They didn't do any of those things. They're basing everything solely off of PET and DOIS. Everything. If you're not meeting PET and DOIS, obviously that means that you have an issue with your performance. That's their position. You heard it. I'm not making that up. You heard that. If they're not meeting their expectations based off of PET and DOIS, it's because their performance is bad. Where's the 1017B log, the unauthorized overtime log? Where's the 3996s? Deny all of those. Here's a good site for you. It's C33998. C33998. And this is from 2019. And it's from Sherry Rose Talmadge. And it's removal of a CCA for his performance. It says the notice of removal dated July 18, 2018, issued to CCA Comstock charging him with unsatisfactory performance was not issued for just cause in accordance with Articles 15, 16, and 19 of the National Agreement, Section 115 of the M39 Handbook, M326, and M1664. Management's inferential conclusion that the use of excessive time demonstrated the grievance poor performance was not sufficient to establish just cause for discipline without evidence that during the 4 days in question, the grievant was guilty of any improper work or time-wasting habits, according to the grievances sustained. And so here's what you do as an advocate, an arbitration advocate. You see what the case is. Now, my case is it would be that audio. It would be that teleconference. That's my case. And so I'm going to get cites. If I'm going to take that audio into arbitration, I'm going to get cites, persuasive value. I've had two there talking about DOIS projections. Two very good cites. We talked about DOIS projections. Can't be the sole basis for a discipline, and they can't be the sole determinant of a carrier's leaving and return time. All right? Two good cites that we could use right there. Here's one on the performance when they're talking about basing the performance off of PET and DOIS. This is a good cite for us. C33998. Findings and fact. Kyle Comstock, the grievant, worked as a city carrier assistant for approximately 2 years at the postal facility in Wheeling, West Virginia. During June 2018, the grievant had a hold down on a different route than the one in question in the instant case. After 1 week, management determined that the grievant was not fast enough and removed him from the hold down. On June 31st of 2018, management issued the grievance a 14-day suspension for unsatisfactory performance for expanding his time while performing the hold down. Management cited the 14-day suspension in the grievance July 18th removal notice it issued. On July 9th, 2018, management assigned the grievance to Route 3101 On 4 days, July 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, the grievant worked longer than the DOIS PET workload projections for the route that he was on. Does that sound familiar? The grievant had carried on Route 3101 a few times prior to July 9th and before it had undergone a route adjustment. On each of the 4 days, management also assigned the grievant approximately a 1-hour bump on another route. On each of those 4 days, the grievant provided a 3996 request for overtime or auxiliary assistance. The grievant testified that he requested auxiliary assistance on July 9th because he was unfamiliar with Route 3101 and had been assigned a 1-hour bump on Route City 43. Moreover, the grievant was 1 hour and 29 minutes late leaving the office. Management approved 1 hour of overtime on 43. Management sent over 1 hour of street assistance. In addition, the grievant used 1 hour of overtime and 43 minutes penalty overtime over the 1 hour he had been approved. On July 10th, the grievant was assigned to carry Route 3101 and a 1-hour bump on City Route 43. The grievant submitted a 3996 requesting 20 minutes of overtime because of his unfamiliarity with the recent changes on Route 3101, which was denied. The grievant also did collections. The grievant returned to the facility 26 minutes late, which was not authorized. On July 11th, management assigned Route 3101 to the grievant and a 1-hour bump on Route City 49. The grievant submitted a 3996 for 15 minutes overtime because he was late leaving the office. Management denied the grievant's request. The grievant used 39 minutes of overtime without authorization. On July 12th, management assigned Route 3101 to the grievant with a 50-minute bump on City 10. The grievant submitted a 3996 for 1 hour overtime explaining to management that he was unfamiliar with the bump on City 10. There was door-to-door on the bump and he was late leaving. Moreover, there were 150 more flats to case than on Monday, July 9th. Management denied the grievance request. Does that sound familiar? You heard that on that teleconference. Deny all the 3996s. Deny. If you're basing off of PET and DOIS, they're going to deny the 3996s. That's exactly what's happening to this young man here. Management denied the grievance request. The grievant used 1 hour and 39 minutes of overtime. The 39 minutes of overtime were not authorized. At the PDI, the grievant explained that he was unfamiliar with the bump on City 10. It had door-to-doors, there was travel time to the bump, and the DPS and flats were upside down. The grievant also contacted management via cell phone and or text message through the MDD scanner provided by the Postal Service. On July 13th of 2018, Supervisor Christina Barr held a pre-disciplinary interview with the grievant and his union steward, David, Hagelazu, about failing to complete assigned duties with the scheduled times. At the PDI, the grievant explained that on July 9th, he had been assigned to carry Route 3101 and given a 1-hour bump on 43. He had submitted a 3996 stating he is unfamiliar with Route 3101, had an extra on City 43, and was 1 hour and 29 minutes late leaving. The grievant requested 1 hour and 30 minutes overtime. Management approved 1 hour of overtime for the bump on 43. The grievant explained that he used 1 hour of overtime and 43 minutes penalty overtime because he was unfamiliar with the casing and left for the street 1 hour and 29 minutes late, had 3 hods of spurs in his parcel hamper to take to the street, later was instructed to bring mail back by the postmaster, and took a little extra time to reroute as a result of traffic accident. On July 10th, the grievant was assigned to Route 3101 and a 1-hour bump on City 43. He submitted a 3996 for 20 minutes of overtime because he was unfamiliar with the recent changes on the street and was denied the overtime request. However, the grievant used 39 minutes of unauthorized overtime. He explained that he had curtailed mail from Monday and performed collections. On July 11th, the grievant was assigned Route 3101 and a 1-hour bump on City 49. He submitted a 3996 for 15 minutes of overtime because he was late leaving. Management denied this request. When asked about the 39 minutes of unauthorized overtime, the grievant replied that he was still new on the route. On July 12th, he was assigned Route 3101 and a 50-minute bump on City 10. He submitted a 3996 for 1 hour of overtime, stating that he was unfamiliar with the bump on City 10, which included a door-to-door, and that he was leaving late to the street. His request for assistance was denied. The grievance explained that he used 39 minutes of unauthorized overtime because he was unfamiliar with City 10, which had door-to-door. There was travel time to City 10, and the DPS and flats were upside down, and there were missorted DPS. The agreement concluded by stating, "I feel like I have not failed to meet the responsibilities or duties of my position. I am trying my best every day and will continue to do so." Supervisor Christina Barr testified that she believed the agreement was intentionally expanding his street time and requesting issuance of discipline. Postmaster Ron Burns, the concurring official, testified that the agreement repeatedly expanded his delivery time without authorization, despite being counseled and given progressive discipline. The postmaster also testified that he questioned the agreement's attitude. The postmaster explained that on June 19, 2018, Supervisor Andrea Cooper walked the agreement's then assigned route with him. Although the agreement had submitted a $39.96 for 1 hour overtime, they returned in under 8 hours. The postmaster testified that when he talked with the agreement upon his return, the agreement stated, "I'll get it back tomorrow." On July 18, 2018, Supervisor Barr, with concurrence from Postmaster Byrne, issued the agreement a notice of removal. And it's what she got the whole notice of removal in there, and that's what I just read to you about what was in the PDI. On February 15th of 2019, Arbitrator Bravern rescinded and expunged the 14-day suspension dated June 31st, 2018, concluding that management did not establish just cause for the discipline because they failed to provide documentary evidence of any misconduct on the grievance behalf. During the 1 week he worked on a hold down, they had asserted he was not fast enough and had removed him from the hold down. I'll read the union's position. Management's position is what I just read to you as far as what they're stating in the PDI. But here's the union's position. Management did not meet its burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that there was just cause to issue the notice of removal to the grievant. The basic principle established by the provisions of the National Agreement is that each employee is to be individually judged by the fair day's work for a fair day's pay, and that any work standards must be fair, reasonable, and equitable. The service's witnesses testified that the discipline was for unsatisfactory performance. However, they also testified that at no time on the dates in question did they go out and observe the carrier or document any negligent or time-wasting practices. Beautiful. The service bears the burden of proving that the agreement intentionally expanded his time. Management failed to satisfy the just cause test. The only rule management cited was that the agreement failed to meet the projected office and street times. The union has presented multiple national arbitration decisions that state no carrier shall be disciplined for failure to meet standards except in cases of unsatisfactory effort, which must be based on documented, unacceptable conduct that led to the carrier's failure to meet the standards. M1769, M326, M829, LM1664, LM304, and M1444. The union has provided documentary evidence that the rule to which management held the agreement is in direct violation of the national level settlements, and therefore the rule is not reasonable. Management failed to conduct a thorough investigation. Management had an obligation to go out and observe the agreement if the charge was going to be unsatisfactory performance. How many times have we said that? 4584s. Where's the 4584s? We've gone out on the street and observed anybody. They're not going to do that. They're too lazy. They're not going to go out and observe a carrier on the street. Management had an obligation to go out and observe the agreement if the charge is going to be unsatisfactory performance. M39 handbook states that an employee may not be disciplined absent documented evidence of misconduct. Management must establish that the agreement was negligent or intentionally expanded his street time. Management has to show that the agreement was engaging in time-wasting practices. Management did not observe the carrier, the agreement, and cannot allege the agreement failed to meet a projected time that was not evaluated to his own performance. Management acknowledged that they did not observe the agreement on his route. Therefore, they do not have documented evidence of misconduct. Discussion. At discussion is whether management had just cause to issue the agreement a notice of removal dated July 18, 2018, charging him with unsatisfactory performance for just cause in accordance with Articles 15, 16, and 19 of the National Agreement, Section 115 of the M39 Handbook, M326, and M1664. Management has not met the burden of proof in this matter. The just cause standard requires the Postal Service to prove The just cause standard requires the Postal Service to prove that the disciplinary action was issued after an objective, pre-disciplinary investigation resulting in proof of an employee's infraction of a clearly communicated, consistently applied work rule. The Postal Service must communicate the disciplinary consequences of the employee's infraction. The administered discipline must be consistent with the charged offense and the employee's past record. Furthermore, the Postal Service must establish that its discipline was imposed in accordance with the procedural requirements of the National Agreement. The basic principle articulated in National Agreement Article 34, Section A is, the principle of fair day's work for fair day's pay is recognized by all parties to this agreement. Furthermore, in accordance with Section B and C, any work standards must be fair, reasonable, and equitable. In the present case, there was no specific street time standards. Therefore, street time standards must be established in accordance with M39. Numerous arbitrators have held that a letter carrier must be judged upon his or her own personal abilities and work performance, as noted by arbitrator Levac. And this is what arbitrator Levac stated. An overall reading of M39 Chapter 2 leads the arbitrator to the inescapable conclusion that route street standards can only be developed with reference to a specific individual carrier. That is, an evaluation must be based upon the performance of an individual carrier while giving a fair day's work. That is, if a carrier is conscientiously working, is engaging in no deliberate or negligent improper practices, the assigned street times for the route must be adjusted and set according to his individual abilities. The gravamen of the service's case is that during the 4 days in question, the grievant, a CCA, who had just been assigned to an updated Route 3101 and had been assigned a 1 hour bump on various routes each day, had used more street time to deliver the route than management expected the route to take based on the DOIS and PET workload projections for that route. The unit provided 3 national level settlements that address whether carriers can be disciplined for failure to meet standards. National level settlement M304, dated 1985, provides that there is no set pace at which a carrier must walk and no street standard for walking. That's M304, and that's for that guy that is on the teleconference stating he had no idea that there was a step 4 that said that. M1444, national level settlement states daily piece counts recorded in accordance with the above referenced system, post or DOIS, will not constitute the sole basis for discipline. However, daily counts recorded in accordance with these procedures may be used by the parties in conjunction with other management records and procedures to support or refute any performance-related discipline. I'll read that again. However, daily counts recorded in accordance with these procedures. There's no 1838Cs. There is no efficiency counts, only linear measurements, which we cannot use. This does not change the principle that pursuant to Section 242.332 of the M39, no carrier shall be disciplined for failure to meet standards except in cases of unsatisfactory effort, which must be based on documented, unacceptable conduct that led to the carrier's failure to meet office standards. See M1769. The City Delivery Carrier's Duties and Responsibilities Handbook, Section 112.1, 112.21, and 112.24, require reliable and efficient service, obeying the instructions of your manager, and displaying a willing attitude and a conscientious effort. There was no direct evidence that any supervisor had observed a lack of such behavior by the grievant, and management cited no specific instance of improper performance. The grievant had been reassigned from his hold down to Route 3101 that had been reconfigured after a route inspection since the last time he had walked the route. He had been on the route only 4 days, and each day he also had been given an hour bump on various other routes. Article 41.3F requires management to give a carrier newly appointed on a route a reasonable amount of time to become efficient on that route. Management have failed to afford the grievant a reasonable amount of time to become efficient on Route 3101. M41 Handbook requires a carrier to notify management when they are of the opinion that they will not be done within the scheduled time. Each day in question, the grievant submitted a Form 3996 requesting auxiliary assistance, explaining his unfamiliarity with the route and the various bumps, that he was leaving the office late because of a large number of parcels and to cover the travel distance to the bump. On each occasion, management authorized less than what was requested. I find that it was improper for management to discipline the grievant solely based on because he had exceeded the street time on a route to which he had just been assigned. The agreement explained to management at the pre-disciplinary interview that he had made every effort to service his delivery route efficiently and expeditiously, and explained the issues that arose on each of the 4 dates that resulted in the use of excessive time. Management's inferential conclusion that the mere use of excessive time demonstrated the agreement's poor performance was not sufficient to establish just cause for discipline. The service presented no direct evidence that during the 4 days in question the agreement was guilty of any improper work habits or any time-wasting habits. The supervisor may believe that the agreement was not being productive on his route, therefore needing overtime to complete the route. If so, the supervisor should have provided a street observation of the agreement and not merely allege that the agreement failed to accurately estimate its need for auxiliary assistance, making more overtime necessary. Based on the above, I find that management did not meet the burden of proving just cause to issue the agreement and notice of removal. Therefore, the grievance is sustained. For the remedy, the removal is to be rescinded and expunged from the grievance record. The grievance is to be reinstated and made whole for all lost wages and benefits. I did not find that the union's request for lost overtime, which is too speculative, is warranted. The union also argued that the grievance should be converted to a career carrier because he had the most relative standing among CCAs as of August 13, 2018, and there were 2 residual vacancies at the Wheeling Post Office at the time. I did not have sufficient evidence to substantiate the grievance relative standing as a CCA and whether there is a current open position for a regular carrier at the Wheeling facility to grant the union's requested remedy. So there you have it. There's 3 good sites. If you're going to take that audio and take that to arbitration, and you're going to have sites you're going to use for persuasive value, there's 3 good ones. You got 2 about DOIS projections, PET projections. You got another. You're going to talk about my expectations. You're going to talk about my performance. You've done nothing to gauge either, right? You've not gone out to the street. You didn't hear him say one time, where's the 4584s? You didn't hear him say one time, where's the 1838s, the efficiency counts to gauge a carrier's performance. So those are the arguments they're going to make because PET is on us. You heard it. It is on us. They're abusing it today as we speak. And I think that the business agents should do a better job of educating the workroom floor on those things because you heard 2 individuals, 2 incompetent, disgusting individuals berating supervisors because they were not beating the carriers enough based off of PET and DOIS. But we'll address that, all right? We'll keep educating on those things, all right? I have my episode from 8 Arbitration. It'll be Saturday. You don't want to miss that one. We're going to get hot. And then next Wednesday, we're going to read some more Cites. I know that may be boring to you. I promise you it's going to help you. It helped me more than anything else. It taught me more than anything else, reading Cites, getting arguments down, management's arguments, where are they coming from? You heard mostly the same arguments. Contractual provisions. You had some good contractual provisions, things that we've been talking about for a long time, these step 4s. No set pace in which you must walk. DOIS, can't set leave return times. We're going to constantly talk about those things. It'll be second nature too. When they come around to you and talk to you in the morning, you'll have those things in your head. All right? You'll be able to answer to them. We're going to educate the workroom floor. That's a promise from me to you. We're going to educate the workroom floor. When the CLC takes over, education is going to be on steroids. We're going to educate the floor like never before. I promise you that. And so I'll talk to y'all Saturday on From 8 Arbitration. I love you very much. Be safe out there. It's extremely hot. It is hot. And so take care of yourselves, Light Blue. All right? I love you, and I'll talk to you Saturday. All right? Bye.